Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Eagle by Hildie Mcqueen, narrated by Mhairi Morrison. Clan Ross of the Hebrides. This fictional story takes place at the beginning of the 17th century in the Scottish Hebrides, isles off the Isle of Skye's western coasts. In the 1500s, lordship over the Hebrides collapsed and the power was given to clan chiefs. The MacNeil, in Barra, the MacDonald, Clan Ranald, in South Uist, the Uisden, in North Uist, and the MacLeod, the Isles of Harris and Lewis. For this series, I have moved the clans around a bit to help the story work better. The clans' locations in my books are as follows. The MacNeil will remain in Barra. The MacDonald, Clan Ranald, is moved to North Uist. The Uisden resides in Benbecula, and the MacLeod remains in the Isles of Harris and Lewis. My fictional clan, Clan Ross, will laird over South Uist. After the death of their father, Laird Callum Ross, the Ross siblings learn of the atrocities he committed against the clan. They must work hard to regain the people's trust and begin anew. Each of the 7 Ross siblings come to terms with their new roles as leaders responsible for hundreds of families. One by one, they will find their calling, their place, and, hopefully, a love for all time. Prologue. South Uist, Hebrides, Scotland, 1602. One of Stuart Ross's duties as guard was to patrol the house where the refugee men lived. The house was located between the Ross Keep and the house where his brothers, Duncan and Caelan, lived. He always looked forward to the trip because it meant time alone with his thoughts, and he could return in time for last meal. His warhorse trotted sideways, its huge hooves lifting and lowering from the ground in dainty steps. "Stop it," Stuart said to the horse, who paid him no heed, and added a head bob to its repertoire. Annoyed at the animal's antics, Stuart gritted his teeth and pulled back on the reins. The horse seemed to be in some sort of mood, continuing its odd walk. "What is wrong with you? War horses do not prance," Stuart barked. A chuckle came from somewhere between the trees. Whoever it was must have overheard him. "Who's there?" Stuart asked, while looking into the foliage. "It is I, Mr. Stuart." A willowy young woman appeared. She wore the distinct faded clothing of someone of little means. A drab but very clean dress, over it a tidy apron. Her hair was covered with a kerchief, pulling it back from her pretty face. "I apologise. I overheard you scolding your horse," she said, lifting her gaze. Her eyes were a light brown, framed with long, thick lashes. She was the new kitchen maid, who'd recently began working at the keep. "Cat, what are you doing so far from the keep?" "I live just past there." She pointed behind her. It seemed rather far from the keep, but he didn't comment. Instead, he looked to see what she held. The young woman blinked and swallowed nervously. "I snared a rabbit to share with my mother and younger brother for supper," she said, holding up a dead hare. "I have the laird's permission, I assure you," she quickly added. Untying his bow from the saddle, he pulled an arrow from the quiver. Cat paled, her eyes not leaving his face. Pulling back, he released the arrow into nearby bushes. "Now you have 2. Thank you," she stuttered, turning to where he'd shot. Stuart nodded. "Be with care, Cat." He urged his horse forward, but couldn't help looking over his shoulder to see what the woman did. Cait remained rooted to the spot, hand lifted in farewell. Interesting that he'd not noticed how beautiful she was before now. Chapter 1. Stuart Ross sat atop his horse on a ridge above the shore, along with 20 other archers, bows at the ready. Below them, atop their own huge war horses, was his brother, Laird Ross, flanked by his other brothers, Duncan and Gideon. They were, in turn, surrounded and well protected by skilled warriors. Everyone was tense and ready for whatever would happen next, as just offshore, a line of Berlins had arrived, their banners high on the masts, declaring them to be Clan Mcqueen. It was not a totally unexpected visit, but it was an unwelcome one. The Mcqueen had not bothered to send a messenger ahead to announce the upcoming visit. Instead, the man had shown up without warning, and only that morning had sent someone to proclaim his arrival. His ploy showed not only a lack of tact, but also why he was not well liked by other lairds. Ross and Mcqueen clans were not on good terms, but neither were they enemies. The animosity between them had endured from when they'd warred decades earlier. This current visit probably had to do with Clan Ross taking in a group of men seeking asylum in early winter. Their leader, a man by the name of Lennox, claimed he and the other men had left Clan Mcqueen fearing execution. Apparently, their defection was not taken lightly because instead of sending an emissary, Laird Mcqueen travelled to see about the issue personally. Even from a distance, it was easy for Stuart to tell who the Mcqueen was as he rode toward Darragh. An older man with grey hair shining in the sunlight was one of the few who'd brought a horse. He was slight and looked almost childlike compared to Darragh, who was younger, taller and well-built. At times like these, Stuart was not fond of his role as archer because it meant remaining in the background. An archer's position was behind the warrior lines, which meant being far from the conversations, and many times also a distance from the actual battlefield. Not that he expected there to be any sort of fight. The Mcqueen had only brought a small contingent of men with him ashore, and only those warriors flanking him were on horseback. "This is an interesting turn of events," his brother Ewan, also an archer, said. "The asylum seekers have not caused any trouble since arriving. Why does the laird himself come to retrieve them?" Stuart shrugged. "Obviously, there had to be a strong reason for the men to leave. Lennox has been reluctant to give any explanation, other than the laird believed them to be disloyal." The Mcqueen's arrival meant that Lennox would have no choice. He would have to give Darragh a good reason to allow him and his men to remain. As a signal, Darragh lifted his right hand and flicked his cupped hand toward the keep. It meant that he'd invited Laird Mcqueen to visit. As the two lairds led the way, the warriors, and then he and the archers, followed. "I really am not in the mood to hear whatever this is all about," Ewan said. "I must go home and see about Catriona." His brother's wife had recently given birth to their second child, a healthy boy they'd named Gawain. And since then, Ewan was rarely away from his family. Stuart did not blame him. It was good to see his brother so happy and settled. With a shrug, he replied, "No reason for you to remain. I doubt our presence is required. Go home. I will let you know if anything of interest happens." It would take roughly an hour to arrive back at the keep. Stuart replaced his bow, strapping it to the side of his saddle, and rolled his shoulders. He'd not slept well the night before, accosted by restlessness. Being less rested made him extra alert. He never wished to be the cause of others coming to harm. Just then, a rider neared. It was his cousin, Stuart Ross, whose primary duty was as a scout. "The laird requests that ye go speak to Lennox. Tell him what has happened, and ask that he come to the keep." His cousin looked past him for a moment, before continuing. "When ye and Lennox arrive at the keep, enter through the side gate, so not to be seen by the Mcqueen warriors." Stuart hated missing the discussions that would occur once the lairds arrived at the keep. "Did the Mcqueen state what he wants?" Stuart shook his head. "They only spoke greetings and talked about the late laird, your father. Then the Mcqueen asked if he could speak to Darach in private regarding who he called the traitor." Stuart blew out a breath. "I best hurry if I am to retrieve Lennox and be back in time to help if needed." He motioned to two warriors. "Come with me." "I think I will come as well," Stuart said. The abandoned building where the asylum seekers were housed had been transformed during the winter. True to his word, Lennox and his men had made extensive repairs to the walls and roof, restoring the house to its former state. There was even a garden on one side that a man was tilling when they rode up. The night they'd first discovered strangers on the shore, 20 men had set up a meagre camp. Once settled into the current building, 9 made the choice to leave before the weather turned any colder and had travelled south to seek a home with another clan. The 11 that remained seemed content with their new living arrangements. Upon Stuart and the warriors nearing the house, Lennox came out, his gaze wary. "Has the Mcqueen arrived, then?" he asked. "Aye," Stuart said, dismounting along with Stuart. "He and my brother are at the keep now." "Is he demanding we be turned over to him?" the man who'd been tilling asked, as he walked over and joined Lennox. Another pair of men came from the house and listened with interest as well. When Stuart hesitated, Lennox motioned to the door. "Should we discuss this inside?" He and Stuart walked inside what had been a dilapidated structure. Stuart was impressed with all the work they had done. The interior had been transformed into a beautiful home. Support beams had been replaced and furniture built. A long table with benches filled half of the large room. There were a pair of chairs by the large hearth, and cots lined 2 opposite walls, 5 on one side, 6 on the other. The men gathered, and Stuart motioned to the table. Understanding their worry, he had to tell them something, but there wasn't really any information to impart. "Laird Mcqueen, along with a small contingent, came to shore today. He and my brother are to have a private conversation upon their arrival at the keep." The men murmured among themselves, several looking toward the cots, probably mentally deciding what to take. They had not come this far only to give up. "We can leave." The statement from Lennox was soft, but resolute. "Nay, my brother wishes to speak to you. He asked that you come to the keep with me. We are to enter through a secret entrance, so you're not seen by the Mcqueen men." "How do we know you will not take us captive and turn us over to the Mcqueen?" one of the men asked. "If we wished to imprison you, we would have done so by now," Stuart snapped. "You should have expected that sooner or later Clan Mcqueen would come in search of you." Lennox looked to the men who seemed to consider him their leader. "Laird Ross has been a kind host, and I trust him. I will go and see what the Mcqueen wants. Remain here. I will send word. I can assure you that my brother is not inclined to turn you away," Stuart informed the men. "You have posed no threat to our clan, and we hold you in high esteem." The men seemed to take in what he said, but still exchanged looks, as if considering whether to flee or remain. Stuart did not blame them. As they rode toward the keep, Lennox gave Stuart a curious look. "Who came with the Mcqueen?" "Just the small contingent of warriors. There are 4 Berlins. 2 men remained with each one." Lennox frowned. "Ye were with your brother? You know what was said?" "Nay, I was on the ridge, a distance away. I could not hear anything." He did not mention that Artair had heard the conversation. "But yet you could see everything so clearly." Stuart shrugged. "I have very good eyesight." They rode a bit longer before Lennox spoke. "Ye and the laird look nothing alike." Lennox seemed eager to make conversation. It was probable he was nervous about what awaited. "Darach is son to my father's first wife. The rest of us are sons to his second wife, except for Caelan, who is bastard-born." "I see," Lennox said. "Your brother Caelan comes often and gives us work." "Aye, I am well aware," Stuart said. "He has a lot of land to maintain around his house. I am glad that ye and your men have been able to earn a living." The warrior was quiet for a few minutes. 5 of my men wish to work as Laird Ross's guards. Do you think it will be possible?" Stuart understood the need to find work doing what one knew best. He would always prefer to be an archer over anything else. "Let us see how this visit goes, and then we can speak to my brother." The man nodded and let out a sigh. "I do not understand why the Mcqueen would wish for us to return. There is nothing to be gained from men who are not loyal to the one in charge." "It could be a matter of pride." Lennox nodded. "Aye, perhaps." Upon arriving at the keep and stowing Lennox in a room near the maids' quarters, Stuart went to seek out his eldest brother. Darach and the Mcqueen were in the great room. It seemed the hospitality portion of the visit continued. When Stuart walked closer, Darach motioned to him. "This is Stuart, third-born son." The Mcqueen looked to him with disinterest, but he managed a nod and a slight lift to the corners of his lips. If Stuart was to guess between a smile and a sneer, he would guess the latter. Upon closer inspection, he saw the man's grey hair was actually quite thin. It was more likely his scalp Stuart had seen shining in the sunlight earlier, as it was showing between the limp strands of remaining hair that for whatever reason the man chose to wear long, hanging well past his chin. There was also a yellowing to the Mcqueen's skin that told of failing health. At the same time, by the narrowed eyes and pinched brow, he fought to not show the pain he was in. Stuart recognised the gleam in the Mcqueen's eyes. He should. He'd seen it often enough in his late father's gaze. It could be that the man was not there so much for the men who he called traitors, but to see what he could gain as recompense for what he considered an insult. When he met Darach's gaze, it was obvious his brother saw it as well. The Mcqueen had not brought his wife, nor did any other women accompany him. Therefore, Isabel, Darach's wife, and the other women of the keep were not present. Instead, the long tables in the great room were filled with the warriors who'd come with the laird. The men ate and drank, speaking in low tones. From their wariness, the Mcqueen must have warned them to be on guard, or something of the like. To ensure the family was well protected, Darach had stationed his guardsmen, double the number the Mcqueen had brought, throughout the hall. Some sat at tables, separate from the other clan, with their own tankards and platters of bread and cheese to share, while other warriors were on duty guarding the entrance. Further assurance was provided by Darach's personal attendants, who stood at his back. Stuart reluctantly went to the high board and sat next to a man who'd accompanied the Mcqueen. The man looked to be close to his own age of 32. Unlike the Mcqueen, this man had the bored look of someone who wished to be anywhere but there. "I am Liam Mcqueen, second-born son," the man said in greeting. "My father introduced me to your other brothers before you entered." The man then looked toward the entrance from which Stuart had come, seeming to calculate why he'd arrived so much later. He blew out a breath. "How far is the local village?" "A bit over an hour's ride." A young maid appeared with a large tray. She walked to the head table, gaze downcast, and placed a tankard in front of him. Stuart realised who it was. "Cat, did you and your mother make a good rabbit stew?" Cat's gaze lifted, and her lips curved. "Hi, Mr. Stuart. She asked that I thank you for the second rabbit." "Is it a rabbit all it takes to spend time with you?" Liam asked, while leering at Cat, whose eyes widened and cheeks turned a crimson red. She hastily placed the food down before them and dashed away. "That comment was unacceptable." Stuart spoke in a low, menacing tone. "You will not disrespect the women while in my home." "'Tis but a mere maid," Liam said with an eye roll. "No one of importance." "I will not repeat myself." Stuart took a long draw from his tankard to keep from saying or doing something he'd regret. Across the room, Cat's half-brother, Torek, watched with interest. The warrior's gaze moved from the highboard to his sister. Just then, Darach spoke to the laird in a louder tone, so that everyone could hear. "I insist that ye and your men remain for the night. It will soon be too late to return across the sea to your home." "I accept, on behalf of myself, my son, and my men," the Mcqueen replied. "As a matter of fact, I beg of your hospitality for 2 or 3 more days. I have many things to discuss with you." Blank of expression, Darach nodded his agreement. It was much later that the lairds adjourned to Darach's study. Stuart, Liam and Duncan were asked to join them. Gideon, the youngest, as well as Artair, would remain in the great hall to ensure order between their guards and the Mcqueens, who seemed to take an instant dislike of each other. Once in the study, the men were poured whisky, and they settled into comfortable chairs. The Mcqueen inventoried the room, not bothering to hide his curiosity. "I met your father only the one time he came to visit me. I never felt the need to cross the water to come here. I find sea travel most discomforting." Despite the fact he'd not been aware their father had ever visited a man so disliked by all the surrounding lairds, Darach managed to hide his surprise. "Not everyone is fond of water travel," Darach said with an accommodating tone. "We venture out a great deal by Berlin. I do not mind it." "Let us get to the reason of my visit," Laird Mcqueen said suddenly, a tactic to throw off whoever he spoke to by abruptly changing the subject. "All of the traitors must be returned to me immediately to be punished. I will accept nothing less." Darach sipped his whisky slowly, with his gaze averted, and remained silent, a trait that often discomfited whomever he opposed. It was humorous when the Mcqueen and Liam exchanged confused looks as the long stretch of silence continued. Used to Darach's processing of information, Stuart downed his drink and rose to pour another. "I do believe the weather should be favourable to travelling for the next few days," he said to the Mcqueen. "However, I agree with you. I too prefer to travel by land rather than water." The Mcqueen didn't reply. Instead, he looked at Darach, who looked to Stuart, glass still in hand. "What—" the Mcqueen began, but stopped talking when Darach gave him a pointed look. His brother let out a breath. "No," Once again, the Mcqueen and Liam exchanged puzzled looks. It was Liam who spoke next. "What do you mean, no? It is not a request, Laird Ross. My father has rights over those men." "Does he?" Darach asked with a flat tone. One that Stuart knew meant his brother thoroughly disliked the men he spoke to. Darach looked to Stuart. "What do we know about the men?" "They came asking for asylum from you, stated that they had fled for their lives. We know nothing more. Winter meant they were contained to a certain place, and most of them have stayed there since." "Most?" Liam asked, his expression incredulous. "Half of the men have since left." The Mcqueen's eyes rounded. "Ye allowed half of them to escape?" "They are not our prisoners," Stuart replied. "They may come and go as they please." Liam jumped to his feet. "Those men are traitors to my father. They must face the consequences of their disobedience." Suddenly the Mcqueen's countenance changed, and he gave them an appeasing look. "Be calm, son. Let us not start off by arguing." "What other subject do you propose we speak of, then?" Darach asked. "I would like to get to know you better," the Mcqueen said, meeting Darach's gaze. "As a new laird, I am sure you have much to learn. Perhaps I can provide guidance while here. For now, I will not press the issue of the men you hold." Every word the man uttered grated. Stuart met Darach's eyes and understood his brother was on the brink of losing control. "Why don't we proceed to the courtyard? I will show you the new guard training areas," Stuart said, motioning to the door. As he walked out with the Mcqueens, he noted that Duncan moved closer to a very furious Laird Ross. Chapter 2. Cat's heart pounded so hard she thought it would burst out of her chest. She leaned on a wall just outside the kitchen, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "Whatever is the matter with ye, child?" Greer, the cook, asked, giving her a questioning look. "There is much to do for you to give in to fret." "I'm sorry," Cat replied, lifting her apron to wipe her face. "It's just that one of the men visiting said something upsetting, that is all." Greer shook her head and motioned for Cat to follow her. "Men are horrible creatures at times." The cook hurried to where her daughter ladled out hot figs, mixed with honey, into pastry shells. "Do not be so sloppy, Fenella." Cat lifted 2 pitchers and prepared to go back out. She said a silent prayer no one would bother her. But each time there were visitors, someone always seemed to take notice of her and do or say something untoward. The men who worked at the keep knew her half-brother, Torrick, a warrior for the laird. Not wishing a confrontation with the muscled warrior meant most of the Ross men let her be. However, visitors were another story. As she refilled the tankards of the Mcqueen men at the long tables, several pretended to stretch or lift their hands, touching her arm or backside. Cat was adept at avoiding most of them. Over time, maids became prolific at sensing where to stand and how to turn to stay out of reach. When she walked past where her brother stood, Torrick took her by the arm. "You should do your best to remain in the kitchen. Ask Greer to give you other tasks." "I cannot," Cat replied. "I have only been working here a few weeks. I do not want to be any trouble." He glared in the direction of the visitors and nodded, understanding. Cat went about her duties, feeling better at knowing her half-brother watched over her. Just 6 weeks earlier, she, her mother and her young brother had travelled from the southern portion of the Isle to seek help from Torrick. Her mother was ill, and Cait needed work in order to support them. Her father had been married to Toric's mother. It wasn't until he'd not returned.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?